Danville Local Schools is rich in music history. The first leader of the school choir on record was Miss Carrie Rowlands. While glee clubs seem to have been around since the inception of the school, instrumental music was only introduced about 100 years ago. In 1924, Miss Bernadette Durbin, an elementary teacher at the school, organized the first school orchestra with the intention of performing at School Board of Education meetings and other local events. The orchestra rehearsed twice per week, and while the orchestra enrollment never grew beyond 15 members, the orchestra was a popular group and would continue to be so until 1948 when it was disbanded. By the late 1920s, many high schools across the country were instating band programs, and in 1931, Superintendent W.B. Edgerly decided that Danville was in need of its very own band. Mr. Dana Snow, an elementary and middle school teacher in the district, was tasked to do the job. Snow had been a 1904 graduate of Danville, and in 1938 would become Danville's first fire chief. Snow would direct the Danville Band until 1948, aside from a 2-year hiatus. The band spent their first year of existence performing in local events. The band was officially organized in September of 1931 and was worked into the daily schedule beginning on October 25th after the afternoon schedule was adjusted to accommodate. On November 20th, the band got its first performance opportunity when they marched up the street and back again, according to the 1932 issue of the Clarion. The first official concert took place on December 21st, and the first time those outside of the community would have heard the group was on January 15, 1932, when the band performed in Howard. Limited equipment and uniforms were obtained through community donations. The first band owned a bass drum, a single sousaphone, and capes. The band's first uniforms consisted of blue and white caps and capes, white trousers, and shoes. Interestingly, the band consisted of a group of staff members for several of the first years. Those members included orchestra director Bernadette Durbin, Mr. Snow on the clarinet, and for the first 6 years, Superintendent Edgerly himself was the sole sousaphonist. The first drum major for the band was Kathleen Hendershot. Over the next several years, the band continued to expand its horizons, slowly adding instruments and upgrading uniforms. In 1940, the band purchased new uniforms, the most notable additions being matching jackets and Shako-style hats. In 1941, majorettes first appeared in the band. A second band was added in 1944. It is presumed that this was a junior high band, based on a statement by Snow that they are improving and will be first band members before long.
The band room was down under the stage when I was here in high school. So the band room, you walk down the steps to the center of the stage and again walk down approximately 15 steps to get clear to the bottom into the band room area. And it was very, very small.
Uniforms were again upgraded in 1950, 1973, and again in 1990. The band clearly had a bright future ahead of it, but numbers would dwindle after the retirement of Mr. Snow as the program stumbled to find a steady director. Music had now been an integral part of the school environment and curriculum for over 15 years. But until 1948, music was not the sole responsibility of the directors in place. Band, choir, and orchestra directors all had other responsibilities. In 1948, Miss Lenore Rice became Danville's first teacher to hold the title of music teacher. The band program has gone through a handful of short-term directors in its 87-year history. But after Dana Snow, there have been 3 directors that have stayed on for the long haul and made significant impacts on the program. First came Mr. Lewis Vaughn, who spent 11 years in the district beginning in 1951.
Mr. Vaughn was always very helpful, always a smile on his face. He was never angry at any of us. So.
Vaughn would set record numbers for the program, as well as to create the positions of band officers, which still continue to this day. Beginning in 1966, Elaine Ostrander would spend the next 2 decades leading the students in successful contest performances throughout the state. In 1990, she purchased the classic white jackets that the band became known for and still wear on special occasions today. During the 1997 to 1998 school year, Danville would hire their next long-term music teacher, Mrs. Christy Cochran. Born and raised in Genadenhutton, Ohio, Cochran excelled in sports and music, playing horn in her school band program. She had planned to major in physical education, but her high school band director encouraged her to embrace her talents by focusing on music education. Christy married her high school sweetheart, Joel Cochran, and moved with him to Louisiana, where she finished school and spent her first few years in the classroom. But in 1987, she and her husband decided it was time to bring their young family back to Ohio. Christy, Joel, and their children Jesse and Kelly moved back to Ohio, and Christy began her band directing career at Fredericktown local schools. Christy would spend the next 10 years teaching beginning band and assisting with the marching band before deciding it was time for a change. In 1997, Mrs. Cochran was hired to help build the Danville program back up after a slump that lasted a few years. But Mrs. Cochran began calling students who had recently dropped out of the program and working to convince them to rejoin.
I was already teaching here at Danville when Christy started. Knew that she was coming from Fredericktown and going to be closer to home. Very knowledgeable in her field, and by my playing in the band the whole way through high school here and then playing some at Ohio State, I was really interested in seeing how it came along. After Mr. Vaughn left, until Mrs. Ostrander arrived on the scene, it wasn't a really good experience, so you really had to love music to stay in the band. And Christy brought that love of music with her and the ability to talk with children and be almost a guidance counselor in her own right with the students that she had.
Christy has spent the past 22 years building the program and leading the band in many successful performances and trips. The band has performed in New York City at Central Park and the Statue of Liberty, at the World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C., and at both Disney World and Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida. Christy has also directed the band in performances in Chicago, both at the Navy Pier and in the nationally televised Thanksgiving Parade in 2013. As Christy nears her retirement, Danville bands are truly reaching the end of an era. Christy plans to continue to teach through her Coshocton Community Band, which she has been conducting for the past 11 years. Christy's retirement is an opportunity to spend more time with family and friends, but to the Danville Band program, Christy Cochran is leaving behind a legacy that her colleagues, her students, and the community will remember for years to come.
Christy, we're going to miss you.